Hey everyone! Ever since the release of patch 2.6, I've been pretty much playing Genshin Impact non-stop. Now that I've been able to get through most of the quests in the area, I figured it would be a good time to go over some of the lore that we discover from this new region. Since the lore from the Chasm covers a wide variety of topics, I figured the best way to cover all this information is through a list of all the things we learned during our time in the Chasm. So here are 15 interesting things I discovered while exploring the Chasm. And before we move on, I just want to mention that there will be spoilers. However, I did put in some chapters in this video, so feel free to skip around to avoid any spoilers. With that out of the way, we can get into the content for real. So let's start off this list with the Sumeru teaser. While exploring the Chasm, we come across a secret cave which can only be accessed by blowing up the rocks that block the way in. Once inside, Paimon notes that the environment of the cave is very different from that of other areas in the Chasm. It's super bright and filled with light. The cave also houses all sorts of plant life with branches and roots jutting out of the cave's rocky walls. In the center of the room is a chest which you can only access by activating the 3 elemental monuments scattered around the cave. Interestingly, the elemental monuments correspond with each of the regions and archons we've met so far in Teyvat. There's Anemo for Mondstadt and Venti, Geo for Liyue and Zhongli, and Electro for Inazuma and the Raiden Shogun. After all 3 monuments are activated, we unlock the chest and receive an item called the Shriveled Seed. The item description for the seed reads as follows: a seemingly withered object that seems to, by normal judgment, be a seed. However, it still has a surprising amount of life in it yet. Best not eat it for now. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but this seed will probably play an important role in our journey to Sumeru. Based on the item's description, I believe that we'll have to use the power of Dendro to revive the seed. In any case, Paimon tells us that this seed reminds her of a story about Sumeru, and says that she'll tell us the story after we're done exploring the Chasm. Based on all this information, it appears that we are super close to Sumeru. I don't know about you guys, but I found this to be super exciting, and I can't wait till we get more information on Sumeru. The second and probably most interesting thing we uncover during our time in the Chasm is the Upside Down City. During the Archon quest, Dainsleif tells us that this ancient city doesn't appear to be linked to Khaenri'ah. He does note that while the architecture is very similar, it appears to be more ancient in origin. This is also a conclusion that is drawn by the Fatui action logs. If these ruins predate those of Khaenri'ah and Enkanomiya, then it is likely that the Chasm is linked to the single unified culture we learn about from Sal Vindagnir and Surumi Island. Interestingly, all 3 of these ancient cities were eradicated by an object that fell from the heavens, but more on that later. The third item I would like to elaborate a bit more on is the fountain in the center of the Upside Down City. During the Archon quest, we learn that this fountain is responsible for weakening the curse that was put upon the people of Khaenri'ah. It's the reason why the hilly churls have been swarming the Chasm, and we also learned that it's used as their final resting place as their lives come to an end. It really makes you think twice about fighting the hilly churls in the open world. Anyways, something that I noticed during our time in the Chasm is that this new region seems to be partly based on Mongolia. The fountain itself is directly inspired from a famous fountain from the Mongolian Empire. In the capital city of the Mongol Empire, the Khans built a structure known as the Silver Tree of Karakoram. The silver tree was actually used as a drinking fountain and was often used to dispense alcoholic beverages. The fountain consisted of a tree built out of silver with 4 golden snakes wrapped around it on each side. At the very top of the tree was an angel holding a trumpet. When the Khan wanted to drink with the people, the mechanical angel would blow into the trumpet and the drinks would begin to flow out of the serpents' mouths into 4 large basins arranged around the tree. Unfortunately, the city of Karakoram was destroyed along with the fountain. However, its legacy continues to live on through various accounts of the people who visited the city while it existed. The fountain that we come across in the Upside Down City appears to share a similar design to that of the Silver Tree of Karakoram. Although much simpler in design, it also features 4 spouts of water that empty into a large basin. If you look closely, you'll see that there are 4 sets of stairs that lead into the basin of the fountain. Because of this, I have a suspicion that this fountain was also once used as a drinking fountain, just like the Silver Tree. In any case, it's really awesome to see the inspiration behind the design of the fountain. The next really interesting thing we discover in the chasm is another nail from the heavens. Similar to Dragonspine in Surumi Island, the city that once existed at the chasm was eradicated when an object was thrown down from the heavens. These objects would mess with the ley lines, ultimately spelling disaster for these cities. What I found really interesting though is that both Dragonspine and the chasm seem to have been focal points for the Cataclysm. Durin attacked Dragonspine and the chasm was invaded by the Abyss. And what do both of these locations have in common? They both house the nails that came from the heavens. And this might sound crazy, but it seems like the forces of the Abyss want to destroy these objects. Maybe by destroying these nails, they can weaken Celestia's control over the ley lines. Definitely seems plausible given what occurred during the Chasm exploration questline. On to item number 5. When the traveler reaches the bottom of the chasm, he has to fight a ruined serpent called Haftvad the Worm. Now, the name of this boss is actually derived from an ancient Persian legend called the story of Haftvad and the Worm. In this story, a man named Haftvad and his daughter come across a worm that helps to bring great wealth to their family. Haftvad becomes so wealthy and powerful that he is even able to conquer his own city. Feeling threatened by Haftvad, the Persian king Ardashir attempts to take back his city but is ultimately defeated by Haftvad's forces. The king and his forces retreat and find out that in order to obtain victory, they must kill Haftvad's worm. And so the king and his remaining forces disguise themselves as a caravan of merchants. They then approach the city and Haftvad welcomes them in and essentially parties with them. Once everyone in the city is super drunk, the king and his men find their way to the worm and kill it. After this, the king executes Haftvad and returns to Persia victorious. Again, this was just something I found really interesting, and I love how Hoyoverse integrates real-life myths and legends into the game. I really condensed down the story in my video, so if you're curious about it, definitely look it up, cause the full story is pretty interesting. Speaking of monsters that we need to fight in the chasm, let's talk about the Serpent Knights. Now, I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but each of the 9 Serpent Knights within the chasm have special names. I'll put them all up on the screen really quick right now because I have no idea how to pronounce them. Essentially, all these names are of Nordic origin, and many of the knights' names are linked to characters from the story of Beowulf. But that's not what I wanted to focus on here. When you fight the Serpent Knights, they each have their own unique dialogue about the heavens and the traveler. I won't go through all of the dialogue because that could be a video in and of itself, but several of the knights seem to know that the traveler is not from this world, and they call him the bringer of calamity. So the next time you go through and farm the Serpent Knights, definitely pay attention to what they say. It's pretty ominous stuff. While we're on the topic of the Serpent Knights, let's also talk about the items that they drop. The Gloomy Statuette, the Dark Statuette, and the Deathly Statuette. Based on the art alone, it would appear that these items have a connection to Norse mythology. The Deathly Statuette in particular depicts a one-eyed god. And who is the one-eyed god from the Norse pantheon? The one and only Odin, god of war and death. Part of me wonders if this is a depiction of Fanes, or maybe a god from the Abyss. Either way, this is an interesting development and one that I'm still processing. I'm definitely going to need some more time to think this through, but if you guys have any thoughts on this, let me know down in the comments section below. Moving on from much of the main storyline of the chasm, let's talk about some of the side quests and characters that we run into. Something that I found really fascinating was that the exploration and management of the chasm appears to be a joint effort amongst various nations in Teyvat. While this isn't necessarily stated outright, it can be inferred from the dialogue we get throughout the various quest lines from the Chasm. From what I was able to gather, it appears that Sumeru, Mondstadt, and Snezhnaya have significantly contributed to the Qixing's efforts at managing the Chasm. The purpose of this tenuous alliance between nations seems to be driven by the Chasm's connection to the Cataclysm. Given the past events, all these nations, especially Snezhnaya, have a strong interest in preventing another invasion of the Abyss. This leads into the next item on the list, which is the alliance between the Fatui and Liyue. When speaking with Katarina, Anton, and the various members of the Ninth Company, they all seem to be surprised that the relations between Snezhnaya and Liyue have soured. Before the Osile incident, relations between these two nations seemed pretty strong. According to Anton, Signora helped strengthen relations by creating trade agreements between the two nations, and I presume that when this occurred, Signora also brokered the deal between the Tsaritsa and Zhongli. In any case, the Millelith and the Qixing now view the Fatui maliciously and have stopped assisting them with their efforts at the Chasm. With supplies cut off from the Ninth Company, the Fatui soldiers at the Chasm have sustained heavy losses from starvation and the monsters that inhabit the Chasm. Another really interesting thing that we learned from the members of the Ninth Company is that they were sent by Pulcinella. As with many of the Harbingers, we don't know too much about him. However, we do have an idea of what Pulcinella looks like from the Teyvat story chapter line preview. Anyways, from what Anton tells us, he seems like a pretty calculating and unrelenting person. According to Anton, Pulcinella is willing to sacrifice less valuable assets to achieve his greater goal. That being said, it really makes you view the Ninth Company and the Fatui in a different light. And I hope we get to run into them again because I really liked this group of Fatui, especially Radomir. He seems like a really chill dude. Next up, we have the Mokosh Device. According to various Fatui action logs scattered throughout the Chasm, the Mokosh Device was a device capable of dispelling abyssal corruption. However, before the Fatui could deploy the instrument, it was destroyed by an explosion. It was believed that the Mokosh Device was purposefully overloaded and destroyed. The destruction of the device would land the Ninth Company into hot water as the abyssal corruption began to spread more quickly. When doing research for this video, I learned that the word Mokosh is the name for a Slavic goddess. According to ancient Slavic belief, Mokosh was the goddess of the earth, women, children, weaving, moisture, and fertility. She was revered as a powerful, life-giving goddess and respected for her role in keeping the earth fertile. This ties back into the purpose of the Mokosh Device, which was to push back the abyssal corruption and restore the purity of the earth within the Chasm. That being said, it's pretty impressive that the Fatui have the technology to repel the abyss. As we encounter more of the Harbingers and Fatui, I think it'll be interesting to see what kinds of tools they have in their war against Celestia. The next person I wanted to talk about was Yelan. Now, I was completely taken by surprise when I saw her stalking the Traveler and Paimon as they explored the Chasm. It was really cool to see her helping them beat the ruined serpent from the shadows. When I first saw her art, I thought she was associated with the Fatui. However, her actions at the Chasm speak otherwise. According to Fatui records, the Ninth Company was being stalked by a mysterious individual. The logs state that Sergeant Anton reports that a woman has been following us around. We might need to set up some traps and early warning signs. It's clear from these entries that Yelan was tasked with spying on the Fatui. I also believe she was the one responsible for blowing up the Mokosh Device. However, that's not something that we can 100% confirm. Either way, based on how she's been acting, my guess is that Yelan is working for the Qixing as an undercover agent or spy. Venturing from the more serious topics, I wanted to touch on something that's a bit more lighthearted. So during the Traveler's exploration of the Chasm, we find out that Klee and Kaeya were supposed to help with exploring the Chasm. However, because Klee blew up a stove at Good Hunter, she was grounded by Grandmaster Jean. We also learned that Kaeya was grounded by Jean as well. The whole situation just sounds so silly, and I love that Kaeya and Klee teamed up for some chaos in Mondstadt. I'm sure we'll hear all about it during the book festival in Inazuma. In the number 14 spot, we need to talk about Qiaoying Village. Over the past few patches, we have gotten commissions as well as heard NPCs talk about Qiaoying Village. Patch 2.6 in the Chasm is no exception. During a questline with Zhichong, we learned that her hometown is Qiaoying Village. Apparently, this village houses one of the most famous tea houses in Liyue. In a conversation with Zhongli during the drink mixing event, we learned that this village is located in northwest Liyue. With this many characters talking about Qiaoying Village, it definitely looks like this will be a place we'll go to in a future patch. And now for the final item on this list, and since we started off with the Sumeru teaser, I thought it would be fitting to end this video with the Sumeru teaser. Also, as a huge fan of Sumeru, I just couldn't help myself. Anyways, as the Traveler and Paimon explore the chasm, they run into a giant sentient mushroom named Xamaran. After helping Xamaran, the Traveler learns that the mushroom is not originally from Liyue. According to the giant mushroom, they originally came from a place with hot sands and damp rainforests. This matches descriptions of Sumeru's different biomes. Additionally, after completing the quest for Xamaran, we get some interesting dialogue from the mushroom, which reads as follows. Ignorance might be a blessing, and knowledge might bring forth calamity. This quote echoes what we learned from the Teyvat chapter storyline preview.
The god of wisdom's enemy is wisdom itself, and the oasis of knowledge is a mirage in the desert of ignorance. In the city of scholars, there is a push for folly, yet the god of wisdom makes no argument against it.
With all this considered, I believe that Xamaran originally came from Sumeru and found some way to relocate to the chasm. The dialogue that we get from the mushroom is their way of giving Paimon and the Traveler some advice for when they get to Sumeru. And that is it for the list of interesting pieces of lore we get from the chasm. Honestly, there's so much more to talk about, but I'm saving some of my thoughts on these things for future videos. I hope you guys liked this video, and if you did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace!